Hi everybody, and welcome to the Together Women Rise book event. I'm Deb Berman, and I'm a volunteer at the book club committee, and I'll be your moderator this evening, along with Wesley Howell, another book club volunteer. I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Wesley is in Sacramento, California. We have Wendy here, also our technical guru for the evening. I think this is really going to be a great night, and we're excited to have so many people with us to talk about this timely and interesting discussion of the book, Last to Eat, Last to Learn, My Life in Afghanistan, Fighting to Educate Women. And we are really lucky to have Pashtana Durrani with us, the author of the book, as one of our guest speakers. So before we start, let me just ask everyone to be on mute. We have lots of people on the call, so if everybody's on mute, we'll keep the noise down. As somebody mentioned, if you want to introduce yourself, put your name and where you're from in the chat. We'd love to hear who's here and where you're from. There's closed caption enabled on this Zoom call at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar if you want to turn that on. But in the same way that we have asked you to introduce yourself, there are lots of new friends and faces out there tonight. So we would like to introduce ourselves for a second and tell you who we are at Rise. We are I'm going to read this because I don't want to get it wrong. We are a powerful community of women and allies that has been dedicated to achieving global gender equality for the past 20 years. That's a long time. How do we do this, you might ask? Well, we have hundreds of local chapters all across the United States where members learn about the myriad of gender equality issues that women and girls face. We give grants to organizations that empower women and girls in low-income countries, and it's in this way that we're able to build community with each other and forge meaningful connections with the women and girls around the world that we support. If you look around, we are a great group of women, and if you're already not part of us, I want to know, what are you waiting for? Join us. So the book club is actually one way that you can engage with us. You'll learn more about global gender issues, and you'll experience community with other like-minded women who are interested in making the world a better place. If you want more information, of course, about the book club or Together Women Rise, go to the website, togetherwomenrise.org. And there you can learn about the book club, you can learn about the organization and how to support us. So I'm going to let you know that we're going to change our format tonight. Normally, we would be breaking up into small groups, but we would rather have a little more time with our speaker tonight. So what we'll do is, this is something new, actually. We are going to host a second event. So next week, Thursday night, September 19th at 8 o'clock Eastern, the lovely Vicki Bush-Joseph will be hosting a second discussion about the book. You can register for this deeper dive into the book online on our website. And I think Wendy is going to put something in the chat so that you'll be able to click on a link in the chat and register. We're going to end the meeting as usual with our very famous book giveaway, so don't go anywhere at the end. So without further ado, let me hand this over to Wesley.
Thank you so much, Deb. It is our pleasure and our honor to have Pashtana Durrani with us tonight. And Pashtana, I want to take a second because we didn't have time at the beginning. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yay. Pashtana is an Afghan feminist, activist, and educator. At 21, she became the head of her family following her father's passing. But by then, she'd already founded Learn Afghanistan, the country's first ever digital school network. Forced into exile by the Taliban takeover in 2021, she's currently a visiting fellow at Wellesley Centers for Women, while continuing to provide education for hundreds of girls in Afghanistan, despite the current ban on them attending school. Known for her bluntness and courage, I love that quote, Durrani is a regular commentator on TV and radio and has been the subject of articles and profiles, including on PBS, in Elle in French, and Der Spiegel in German, and Wellesley College. I'm having technical difficulties. There we go. While at Wellesley, Pashtana has continued researching female education and maternal and newborn health. Pashtana has been named a Global Education Champion by the Malala Fund for her outstanding work at advancing Afghan girls' education. The BBC nominated her as one of its 100 most influential women in 2021 and was included in #Times 100 Talks in 2022. She is a member of the Feminist Education Coalition of the United Nations Girls Education Initiative, an Aspen New Voices Fellow, and she received the 2021 Talberg SNF Eliasson Emerging Leader Prize. Previously, she served as a global youth representative for Amnesty International and as a board member of the steering committee for the Global Environment Facility. She is a recipient of the UN Young Activists Award in 2022. She's received the Global Citizen Award for Human Rights 2023 and the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Award 2023. Furthermore, she received Woman of Excellence Award in 2024. Wow, we are just so fortunate, and I'm personally inspired to have you join us tonight. Welcome, Pashtana. We thought we'd start off by having Pashtana do a reading from her book, and so this is a reading that she has chosen for us. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I am so honored, and also sometimes I feel overwhelmed when people read my biography. I'm like, and is that me? That's me. But thank you so much for reading that long biography. So because it's a safe space and it's a woman's space, I really wanted to bring in a new reading to this space rather than what I normally read about, which sometimes is funny, but sometimes it's also more about the situation in Afghanistan. This one is more about the women in my life that I was not related to, but I was exposed to in one way or the other, and they took care of me in multiple forms. And I would really like to honor them in some forms, but also remember them. So here it goes. Most of the girls I knew in childhood were those who attended our school. Before that, other than my sister, my only company were my dreaded male cousins. Nur Bibi was the first girl I remember meeting. She was my mother's protege, a math whiz my mother always claimed. She, like so many Afghan girls, didn't have a happy home and kept lingering after class at our place, postponing going home as long as she could. As my mother was already paying for all of her supplies and slipping her an allowance weekly, my mother decided to offer her the formal role of nanny. Nur Bibi was slowly given chores, the allowance became an income, and hanging around became a job. It was a great source of pride for her. She would study in the corner of our living room whenever she had free time, always present. We were little and needed help from Nur Bibi with everything. I still remember our daily struggles of putting shirts over my head and my arms into sleeves. I remember her as a shadow, as an outline. I have trouble remembering her face, but I could still draw her hands from memory as she was pushing shirts over my head. I had a big head, so that was a thing growing up. Nur Bibi was the first woman in my life to disappear. She got married in her early teens, gone from one day to the next. We never heard from her again. It was like she ceased to exist. Zarona was our second nanny, this time chosen by our father. She was probably not the most obvious choice. The position entailed chasing three unruly children, and Zarona was severely disabled, couldn't walk without her crutches, let alone run. She had polio as a child, and as a result, one of her legs completely atrophied. She couldn't walk for long either because the crutches would cut her armpits until they bled. Being a brat, I of course needed to know everything about it. Does it hurt? Yes, it does. Can she move it? No, she cannot. After that, I'd retreat to my room and try to keep the one leg steady while moving the other, curious to see what the world was like for Zarghuna. Despite all fairly substantial disadvantages for the position of nanny, my father dug in his heels. He insisted that Zarghuna was the kindest, most deserving candidate. We noted agreeably, knowing that was only half the story. We all saw Zarghuna's scar and we all knew she was beaten at home. My father was offering a refuge, not a job. Zarghuna was beaten almost daily with savagery that isn't run of the mill. Every morning, we would see her come down in the street to her house, limping slowly and crying over the latest bout of beatings and injuries. One of those mornings when her father poured boiling water on her, Zarghuna begged my mother to ask my father to intervene. In our culture, it is beyond inappropriate to intervene in another family's affairs, even for a Khan, no matter how obvious the scars or how difficult it may be to look away from them. Private is private. But as Zarghuna's father worked for us, tending to vineyards, my father did go and threaten him with the loss of his job if he did not stop beating Zarghuna. I didn't know if that helped. I don't remember any dramatic improvements in her situation. There was something puzzling in all of this that I found puzzling, not the beating, domestic violence. Behind the closed doors is common, even as kids knew that. It was the fact that Zarghuna lived with her mother, her stepmother, and three sisters, and all of them were beaten daily. 6 women beaten by a single man. I thought I had the solution and wondered why no one else thought of it and that they could beat him up, you know? Once I voiced my Avenger fantasy in front of Zarghuna and my mother, they were stunned, silence. Mistaking it for encouragement to continue speaking, I emphasized, there are 6 of you. My mother was still silent. My remark apparently was so exceedingly stupid and uninformed that it didn't even deserve a flying chaplak. I was the one to pity. It's not how things work, Zarghuna explained tiredly, as summing the role of a nanny. I'm going to stop here, but I can also give you guys a little backstory and also a little further story. But this book is mostly dedicated to the women before me in my life and around me, and how they impacted me into becoming the person I am today, and how I continue to be influenced by amazing, powerful women around me. And again, women who didn't have a power position. But then I also didn't want to shy away from the fact that with a disability like polio, there comes a lot of discrimination, even in one's house. We also don't talk about gender violence, which is such an important topic and aspect that has been forgotten for such a long time. And then child marriages is something that happens majority of the time. My own mother was married off when she was 16. And these are the sort of things that I feel like needs to be discussed openly, but also in a place where it's not seen with hostility. As much as I love Afghanistan and I would like to romanticize it, there are problems when it comes to women and situation in every country, including Afghanistan. And these are just parts of those that I don't want to shy away from explaining or talking about or sharing in safe spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to kind of leave a beat there. That also really relates to our first question, which is when you talk, your bio talks about you as being known for your bluntness and courage. It certainly sounds like that those qualities evidence themselves at a young age. What there and then in your book you continue to talk about, you know, continuing to speak out.
Yeah.
But there is a danger to your own safety and security in doing that. And how do you maintain that courage? Where do you think that courage came from, and how do you maintain that courage?
I think one thing we all have to understand that we all have some sort of courage within us, and it's just within us. Sometimes we seek it, sometimes it seeks us. And I think with me, I just had more growth and nourishment when it came to in terms of like, you know, being blunt. In the book, I talk about this, but the story is very simple. I remember the first time I was included or invited on this table where most of my male cousins would talk and eat with my uncles and stuff. And because it's a tribal conservative family, right? So the women are eating in the other room, or they're eating after them or before them, and it's different dynamics. But I was the one kid, or the one girl that would eat with them because I wanted to eat with my father. But I remember that guys would talk over me, like all my male cousins would talk over me, and I was like a shy kid. I wouldn't talk so much. And I remember there was a time when I wanted to make a point and I couldn't. And my dad was a little disappointed, but he also said, like, he's like, you have this space, you're here, and you're the only one who's making it here. Next time somebody talks over you, maybe you should just, like, you know, make sure that you make your point. And the next time when I was around and I wanted to make a point and somebody talked over me, one of my male cousins, I screamed at the top of my lungs. I was like, no, I'm talking. Let me talk. When I am done, then you can talk, or then that's where you come in or say stuff. And I think that's something that gave me that space. But then at the same time, since then, I have always been very loud about my opinions and my concerns, and I make sure that I voice them in one way or the other, because without our voices, what are we? And also, coming from a long line of women who had to think multiple times before they spoke, I think I have every right to be so encourageably be able to speak so loudly for all of those who couldn't, but also to make sure that other people feel space in that feel safe in that space, and then they can talk and they can voice in their concerns. So it's definitely not like, oh, I'm very brave.
Mhm.
It's more of like, this is who I am, this is how I enjoy myself, and this is how I express myself, and I would really like to take up that space.
Wow. Thank you. You grew up in a refugee camp in Pakistan. And in the book, this was a quote that was really deeply meaningful to me. You wrote, "It was the first time I realized that being a refugee, that growing up elsewhere means to be viewed as a stranger wherever you go. You're an Afghan in Pakistan and a Pakistani in Afghanistan. You can self-define all you want, but you belong nowhere." Can you talk about how this then shaped the rest of your life?
Sure. So when I was growing up, I was like one of those headstrong kids. I was like, Afghanistan, there's nothing wrong with Afghanistan. It's all Pakistan, and everything is wrong with Pakistan. And they are the ones who are like funding all the terrorists and everything. And to 90%, it's right. It's correct. I still stand by all of that. But I used to be the Afghan girl, the political kid, let her be, like she's not part of our community. I remember my school teacher, they would be like, oh, but like you don't belong in this class. I remember them being very blunt about it. And I used to think to myself, I was like, oh yeah, probably because they are not from my country. That's why they don't want me in this class, or the way my father wears a turban when he comes to a parent teacher meeting, or the way I have to wear a scarf, whereas girls in my school didn't. And I was discriminated for all of that. And I used to tell myself as a teenager, I was like, this is all because I'm in this country and I'm a refugee. But the minute I went back home, is the time I realized is the fact that uh, I grew up in Pakistan, so I had an English accent that resembled more South Asian accent. And I remember Afghans who came in from the US or other countries, they would make fun of refugees returning from Iran or Pakistan, and they would call them Irani or Pakistani because they thought of them as second class citizens because they didn't came in with a second passport, or they didn't come in with more privilege like they did. And that sort of made me reassess like how I thought about everything, because in our own country, that was the first layer. Wherever you went, that's how you were discriminated against. And the second one was,
Mhm.
I was not even from the city. I was from the tribal last district, which is Maruf. And Maruf had all its people moved into another border district called Spin Boldak. And we were internally displaced people. So you go from refugee to returning to your own country to becoming an internally displaced person to representing your community. And then you're sort of judged for your accent, the way you look, the way you talk, and you're just a teenager. So I think it would hurt me more when it was in Afghanistan because I wanted to feel more at home. I wanted to feel more safe. I wanted to feel like I belonged, because there was no running away from that, right? Because that was the place I was fighting for. So yeah, but now I think I'm in that part in my life where I have realized majority of kids who grow up in these spaces are like that. Majority of us struggle with our identities. Majority of us struggle with
Mm.
how we pursue ourselves. So it's an ongoing struggle, but I think now I have gotten comfortable with the person I am, what I carry with me, what I carry from my refugee years or from my IDP years, or even as an Afghan woman. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Tell us a little bit about your life today. What have you been doing at Wellesley College since you left Afghanistan? What about your nonprofit? Tell us a little bit about Learn and the Girls Education Program. I understand this has been continuing and you've been managing from afar, and how is that working?
So as of today, we have more than 700 students in 6 different provinces, and they're attending school every day. So that's a big win for me. I'm so excited
Yeah.
about it. I've been so excited the whole day. I've been so happy. It definitely has been a tough few weeks, but today was sugar, very good day. So we have 6 schools in 6 different provinces. We have Kandahar, Helmand, Bamyan, Daikundi, and Herat, and as of the day before yesterday, Samangan. Our hope is that we can continue growing up in all our communities and in all the 34 provinces of Afghanistan. The biggest, so this is like the biggest achievement I have, and I'm gonna be so flaunting about it for the rest of the few weeks. So that's the first thing that we are doing, and these are in-person schools. So for those of you who know about Afghanistan's situation right now, women are not allowed to teach, and girls are not legally allowed to go to a space where they can learn publicly. So public schools cannot be accessed post grade 6. But at the same time, um, I'm not the only one who does that. So I just also want to acknowledge all the other women who are doing this. But for all small effort, we have been able to expand to all these 6 provinces. We have all these 700 girls who are right now accessing education from grade 7 to grade 12, and they're accessing it in a daily in-person school, underground school format, with all their subjects and all their credentials. So that's like the biggest win we have right now. We're also investing in satellite education, which is something that I cannot go a lot in detail, but we have partnered up with a satellite company, and we're providing internet to girls in Afghanistan for free. And also it's something that is so safe that it cannot be traced by the current regime. So you can access all sorts of classes, pastoral classes, free of cost, and you can continue learning on Zoom with other spaces. So we have partnerships in California, we have partnerships in London, where people Zoom in and teach our girls in those 2 spaces. The third thing that we are doing right now is we have a radio program that goes around all the 34 provinces of Afghanistan and the refugee camps in Pakistan, and some spaces in Iran too. And what we do with that is they have more than 3 million users in that space. And that's where the 34 provinces, they get an education hour, which is in Pashto and Dari, are both native languages and national languages, and they get access from grade 7 to grade 12, and they get basically tertiary, or I would even say secondary phase of learning. So that's the third thing that we have invested in, and we have such a huge program. It has been going on for 2 years. We are repeating our curriculum, and we are innovating it. Apart from that, I cannot take the SIM card's name because this might be put on YouTube or something. We have partnered up with a SIM card company, which is a mobile service company. What happens with that is if you're using that SIM card, you can just subscribe to our channel and you'll get all the learning from grade 7 to grade 12 for free. And we have more than, I think right now, 6 million users that are subscribed to that subscription. So around 6 million users are getting grade 7 to grade 12 learning in Afghanistan for free. And this is mostly parents. These are mostly the fathers of these young girls. These are mostly brothers or the girls themselves, their mothers. So it's a mix of all of those. So right now we are experimenting with different learning systems. We're also experimenting with in-person spaces. I also want to acknowledge that it's all made possible because of my teachers, female teachers who are in Afghanistan and who show up every day in person to these spaces, to all the girls who show up every day in person, and all the staff members. And also at the same time, like, all these community members who have invited us. I don't go to communities and tell them I want to educate their daughters. Communities come and reach out to us. We talk to them, we do a needs assessment. And after that, we work with them in partnership to open a space for the girls. So it definitely is a whole process, but we continue. And tiny anecdote, a tiny update on the healthcare. We do run a clinic that is fully functional for the whole South and Central Highlands region, and that almost looks after 500 patients and mothers and babies. That has been helping women all along, and it's an open free clinic. Anyone can access it. So it does provide safe space. If you're seeking prenatal, postnatal healthcare and abortion or anything of that sort, that's a space for you. Yeah.
Wow.
A lot
That's
of
No, that's amazing. Do you have concerns about safety for the girls? What have you had to do things to protect girls as you were talking about SIM cards? I was thinking about the security, right, of people knowing that you were accessing the curriculum or not. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I'm never gonna deny that, oh no, everything is safe and everything is rainbows and flowers. No, it's not.
Mm.
Last 2 weeks ago, our school in Kandahar was discovered by the current surveillance team, and they went to my students, and it's so funny. My students are like, they came to us and they were like, "What are you studying in this place? You come every day. I see you every day. What are you studying here?" And she's like, "We study religious studies here, you know." And then he's like, "No, show us your books." And the funny thing is, they're so smart. So what they did was like, they didn't have anything with them. They're like, "Okay, check our bags, you know." And they checked their bags and they're like, "We're gonna come again tomorrow." And then the girls went back home and they called me and they texted like the whole team and they're like, "So this is happening. You should know, FYI." And then my staff member got a call that said, "How dare you work in this space?" And he's like young kid, so he's like scared. He calls me in the middle of the night. He's like, "This is happening. The Taliban just called me," and he's like, "How dare you work in this?" I was like, "Okay, we're gonna calm down. We're gonna manage this." And I was like, "Okay, we got you a ticket. You're gonna go and you're gonna leave this province." We sent him to a different province. We closed down the physical space. We sent the girls at home. We told them not to come for a week. We told them that we're sending them tablets to home, and and they're going to start working online with us, and we're going to pay for their internet. And once things have settled down, we're going to work with their labs. So because they're in grade 9 and 10 and they do have labs that they have to work on, we're going to find another space. And the girls were like, "Okay." So now majority of them are studying from home, and they come up with small groups in their own homes, and they have snacks ready and they have tea ready, and then they take pictures and send it to me. And I'm like, "You guys are literally partying while studying, you know?" So it's like teenage girls and it's so cute. But yeah, like life goes on. Like, yes, sure, there are threats that are happening all around Afghanistan. I'm pretty sure people go in more dangerous places than this. But this is also big for someone like me who, like, if something goes wrong, it's my name, you know, and I have to be responsible for the young kid and the girls. Um, but I'm also so grateful for the parents who have made sure that they take care of their girls and they are there for them and they drop them and they pick them and then they tell the teachers what to do, what not to do, what is the safe way to communicate, you know. So yes, it's such a struggle. It breaks my heart when I have to close a school and find a new place or do something about it. Um, but it also fills my heart with joy when I see girls graduating, you know, and we just had a crazy graduation party, by the way, in July. And we had all these elaborate gowns and we had like, you know, party themes and we had like, you know, cake and pictures. And we went all professional, by the way, with all of that. And it just fills my heart with joy that they get to enjoy that, because when I was graduating, it was all online. Afghanistan was falling apart. But they get to enjoy that in Kandahar, in their own hometown, in their own home province, where they can go home and carry that diploma and show their parents, you know. Um, so security is a big concern. I'm never going to deny that. But Afghan women are so resourceful, so it works out in the end, in some forms. Yeah.
An amazing level of resiliency,
Yeah.
just amazing. So we're coming up on it just was recently the third anniversary of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the takeover of the Taliban. And you wrote in the book about why you and others wanted to or waited to leave the country. And you wrote, "It's not that they don't know what's going to happen, especially not in Afghanistan, where fleeing should be an Olympic discipline.
Yeah.
It's part hope, part disbelief that keeps you put. You think, quote, you think you're on the outside of it all." Can you talk a little bit more about that feeling and then finally how you came to the decision to leave?
I think because, as I said, like, you know, growing up as a refugee is a very different experience from growing up as an immigrant in another
Mm.
country. It's two different things. When you're a refugee, you're in uncertainty. In the back of your head, your family keeps on telling you that nothing, this that you see, the house that you're growing up in, the friends that you're making, the people that you know, the shop that you walk to, none of this is permanent. Our home is somewhere else. We belong to some other land. This is all temporary. But in the same time, your grandparents died there. You grew up there. That's the only life you know. And growing up, every time my father would tell me that, and I was like, what does he mean? What does he do? But I loved him so much. So every time he would go to Afghanistan, I would be like, I would rather be in Afghanistan than be here, be safe, and I would pray for that all the time. Um, and then came the time that I made that decision because I felt like I couldn't fit in that society anymore. And it felt like going back home was the right choice. And you go back home. Sure, not everything is going to be perfect, but it still is home. You still get to meet that one cousin that everybody talks about for years, but then you get to meet her. You get to meet that one aunt that everybody's like so badass, but you never saw her. And then you meet her and you're like, oh my God, that's you? You did all of that? That's crazy, right? So, and you go and see the lands that your grandfather cultivated, or you go to the house that your grandmother built, with love. So there's always going to be that sense and that lack of belonging, but also not belonging. Because yes, you can see your grandparents in that, but do you see yourself in that? It's hard to understand that. But then at the same time, it was, I'm the third generation of my family, at least, that has been fleeing Afghanistan in some way or form. My grandfather fled in the 80s when he was fleeing the Russians. He was a mujahid. He fought against the Russians, and then he fled because he was injured. My grandmother, my own grandmother, his first wife, she fled before him because she wanted to educate her sons, and she was not so happy with him getting married the second time. So she's like, bye. So she left the house even before him. And then he fled. And then the second generation, like my father and everyone, they had to flee. Even within the second country, they had to flee because they were political prisoners at time. So they fled. And then my uncles were sent to Germany. So they became the second generation. They had to flee Pakistan to Germany. And then they became the second generation of fleeing people. And then it was 2021 and I had to flee, and I kept on thinking to myself, like, the whole last century has been us fleeing different countries and not calling one place home. And I don't remember the last time I could feel attached to a place that much, because at the end of the day, you really don't have that permanence anymore left, So thinking of that, but I also think of all those people who have done the same thing in their lives, uprooting all their lives in the middle of the night, making that decision and leaving and going to a completely different country where you probably don't wear the same clothes, you don't speak the same language, and even if you do, you don't have the same accent. You're always going to be seen as an outsider, but at the same time, that's the only safety you have. So it's I can go on and talk about this, but I think at the same time, I also feel like Afghans are in this boat where they deeply belong to Afghanistan, but in many ways, the daughters of Afghanistan, at least, are not welcomed, at least in right now, the current space. And it just makes your heart bleed a little that that's what we have come to.
Now, have you been back since the Taliban took control? And what was that like?
So I mean, now that it's a safe space, we can talk about this. But I have been smuggled in 2, 3 times, and I had to go back, not because I want to show that I'm such a baddie, but just because I had to do a lot of work and I had to meet my students and I had to take care of some family business and our lands. So every time I go back, the first time I went back, I couldn't walk properly because I was so crushed by everything happening around us. So the border that I was crossing was blocked from one end. The country was not letting the Afghan refugees cross into the other border. And I remember seeing like numbers, hundreds of Afghan refugees being stuck in this small way and just waiting for days just to either cross or come back, and they were just stuck in that place and you couldn't breathe. You could barely breathe. And I couldn't, and we were returning on a different place because of the passport and everything. And I kept on thinking to myself, I was like, we had sovereignty and now we don't. And that's how our people will be treated from now on. And that's how we are treated after that. And then I remember driving back to the city and we keep on talking about how Afghan men don't want education for their girls or something, but it was so fascinating. And I took pictures of that so that I could rub it in people's faces when they say that. Everywhere I went, everywhere I saw was, if you really want to educate the future of Afghanistan, if you really want to save Afghanistan, educate our daughter. If you really care about Afghanistan, educate our daughter, educate kids, And this is in Taliban-controlled Kandahar, where the Amirul Mominin or the supreme leader sits. And this was on walls while you're entering the city. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, there is some form of resistance going on. But then at the same time, the schools were closed. The teachers that I worked with, the 18 schools that I worked with were all closed. I went to Helmand to check in on my other school. And I remember passing by this crane where there were two bodies hanging from that crane. Those were kidnappers, but there was no rule of law or something. The minute they were said that these people are kidnappers, they were just hung, from a crane in the middle of the city. So witnessing that side of Afghanistan is something that is always going to hurt me a little. The fact that going to school and showing up to school is so illegal that you have to change your identity to do that. You have to hide even from your own students. Even when you're meeting them, you cannot tell them what is happening, who is doing what. So all of that is sad. But at the same time, it was the around time when I was back, I was when they banned the salons and women couldn't go to salons. And I remember talking to one of my aunt and she's like, you know what? I don't care about this. And then what she did was like bring in the salon lady to our house, and we all just dyed our hair. We went with the most crazy hair, and we all dyed our hair. And we were like, you know what? Yes, you can ban the salon, but you cannot ban women taking care of themselves or dyeing their hair or putting on makeup or something of that sort. So in one way or the other, of course, people and life will continue. But it's a very different Afghanistan from what I have known.
Yeah, absolutely. You've seen a lot of loss,
Yeah.
and what gives you hope? What keeps you going? I mean, I'm getting a sense of your just personal energy. What what keeps you going, and what's in your future? What's next for you?
So I think I just at this point I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna do what I want to do. There's no me and my philosophy. It's all out of spite, ladies. It's all out of spite. I'm spiting on the Taliban, and I'm like, you know what? We're gonna prove it. We're gonna prove you wrong. Because every time I get to hear this from the Taliban is like, oh, this is not in our culture. We don't educate our daughters. And I'm like, for 20 years, men sent their daughters to school. My father sent his daughter to school, a man who's, by the way, wearing a turban in my background. And I'm like, we all did that. We all saw that. All of that is happening. So either you don't come from our culture, or the culture you're talking to is a very alien culture to us, because that's not our culture. So I just want to defy Taliban right now and just fight them out of on what they talk about and what they believe, and challenge them on that. Because I think that would be a sad day where people start believing that what Taliban have to say about Afghanistan is true. So that's all spite energy right there. But on a serious note, I think my plan right now is to have all the 34 schools up and running in the next year. Hopefully all the 34 provinces have their own schools. I'm hoping that the radio program can cover more subjects. I'm really hoping that everything is that I'm hoping to cover with satellite programs is something that we can expand to all provinces. I'm also hoping to ensure that the healthcare facilities are up to standards, but also are accessible to women in all zones, and that's expanded on. And then I just want to continue what I doing the same thing, but in all the conflict zones, because one thing I have learned is men will continue fighting, and there's very little that I can do about stopping a war. But the one thing I have learned is being good at navigating that uncertainty and sharing those practices with other women in need. So be it Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, any of those spaces where you have uncertainty and your education is weaponized, your human rights are weaponized, your women rights are weaponized. I want to be part of that space and ensure that I can provide those resources in one form or the other. So yeah, I'm hoping to do all of that. Let's see. Let's see. And also graduate. I'm yeah.
Oh yeah, graduate.
Yeah, that too.
I have absolutely no doubt of your ability to do those things. You are an inspiring badass, and I have loved talking to you. And I've been watching the chat like blow up with questions that folks have for you. So let's go ahead and turn it back over to Wendy, and she can read some folks' questions for you. But thank you so much. It's really fun. Yeah.
Thanks, Wesley. Yes, there's lots of questions. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. Kind of going back to your upbringing and you talking about how your father brought you to the table and let you, eat and sit and talk with everyone. What was it that made your father kind of be different than, many other Afghan men in allowing his daughter to sit there? And did the other men object to you being there?
I love that question. I think it happens all around the world, and it's not just Afghan men. I would say that my father, the reason he did all of that because he was brought up by a woman. He was brought up by a woman who was a leader, who was so sure of herself, who knew what she wanted, who was not afraid of leaving her husband when he married the second time, which is very normal in at least at that time period. She was so sure of herself, and she did that, and she took all her sons, all her daughters with her, and she coming from privilege, she still chose to educate all her kids instead of putting them to work, and then she worked herself. I think seeing a strong woman like that just made him think that if my mother could raise 11 kids like that, or even more, I don't even remember how many brothers my father had at this point. But if she could do that, he was sure that I was her granddaughter. I could probably do more stuff. And then also he saw his sister suffering because his sister was married off very young, although she was educated, and they wanted all nice things for her, and then she was domestically abused, and that's where he got her divorced and then put her through school, put her through B.Ed and M.Ed, and made sure that she thrives in her career. So I don't want to say that my father did that out of love for me. I was his favorite, of course. But then again, the fact that he saw so many strong women around him go through so much hardships because they didn't have proper access to education or those spaces and opportunities. And he wanted to make sure that this generation of women don't go through that. And that was one of the reasons that he made sure that I have access to those opportunities just like a boy would. And oh my God, all men in my family hated it. My family men hated it. They hated him big time for that. Even when he died and he passed away, and I remember on the third day of his passing, all my uncles were like, whatever was he doing is okay, but this cannot happen anymore. And I was like, you don't get to decide that. Even that was so hard for them they wanted to control that. So yes, of course he was challenged in many ways, but then again, at the same time, if a man in a position of power makes a decision like that, it makes it much easier for all women around him to access that space. So because of me, a lot of other women, a lot of other people did the same thing. They sent their daughters to school. Majority of my cousins went to school because my father put me in school, and it was okay with people saying stuff.
Well, and continuing on that line, you became the leader of your tribe after your father passed away. Tell us a bit more about what that was like, that experience.
So it definitely was one of those experiences where you always wished you were the next person in line to do all of that, but like, it came out of like this place of envy for your brother, and I don't want to deny that. I always like was, envious of my brother because he was supposed to end up in that place and I was supposed to end up in a political place, right? But when my father passed away, and I remember navigating all of that, and my brother was a kid, he couldn't even stop, like, thinking about things and life and everything. He just shut down, and I had to navigate all of that. That's where I remember that my father's friends, they would just come up to me and they would be like, "You're our last hope. And you're the one that who's going to take over for him. You're the one who's going to like, continue the tradition." And I couldn't believe. I was like, these are the same conservative friends that would tell him not to send me to school, right? Like they're saying this, you know. And then at some point I did ask one of his friends, I was like, why, And they were like, well, you kind of proved yourself, like, we are always scared to put, and it was coming from a misogynist place. But like when he said that, I was like, oh, he's like, when you want to be a Khan, be a man or a woman, you have to prove yourself. Your father proved himself when your grandfather passed away. He took care of people. He took people in. He took care of our problems. He would go for months when people would go missing. He would take care of their families and stuff. And then your father passed away, and then people needed you, and you stepped in and you showed up. If you couldn't do a lot, you at least were there. So that's why. And then I was like, oh, okay, makes sense. Thanks. And he's like, you are strong enough to do that. I mean, it has traumatized me big time. I'm never going to deny that. But then at the same time, being chosen to be in that space, being able to talk about all of that, and being able to take that decision, that power of decision making is very crucial and important. And sort of give me a very different perspective. So yeah, I mean, it still is like challenging. I still get calls in the middle of the night where people are like, we need money, or like, we need you to get me out of this place, or, or like day before yesterday, got a call from one of my relatives who is related to me by tribe. They're like, oh, one of my daughters couldn't get admission into your school. Please do that. Get her into the school. She didn't pass the interview. But then I had to get her the admission, so all those things, it's different navigation. But at the end of the day, I think the reason my father wanted me to be in this space was I understood the responsibility, I knew how to deal with it, and I grew up in that, so I wouldn't shy away from dealing with it. Yeah.
What about a number of people are asking about your family and if you feel comfortable sharing how they're doing?
Sure. So both of my siblings finally have enrolled in colleges and they are studying. Both of them are studying. They don't go in the public a lot because of their security and also because of the things I do and say on TV. So they're worried about, I'm worried about their security. So they study, they work at Learn, they volunteer majority of the time with our community. But they do live very private lives. They enjoy their schools. They sometimes struggle with schoolwork, so they call me. But the majority of the time, it has been a very private life for them, for at least for the past a year and a half, given the situation.
That makes sense. So tell us, after the girls graduate, and it's wonderful to hear that they experience a joyful graduation and cake and all of that. They deserve to do that. What do they do with their education? What kind of happens next?
So, because I believe personally that education is something that has to bring you resources, especially if you're in a country like Afghanistan, you should be able to generate some finances out of your education if you're putting so much time into it. So my goal is always that either they end up as freelancers or working, getting a job, or end up in a space where they can continue higher education. So the batch that just graduated in July, our goal is to get them into medical school. So 18 of them are enrolled in a medical school that is online right now in Afghanistan. And we're hoping that the first 2 years they can study the general anatomy, and then we can transition them into a full-time school, either in Qatar or some other place that we can find for them. So there are different options that we are looking into. Two of the girls are now enrolled in Canada in program that is helping them become, I think they're pursuing bachelor's in computer science. And then there are girls right now, we're working with AI, and we're hoping that they could be the first team that could experiment a lot with AI so that we could get them jobs in that space. So one way or the other, we really want them to be able to pursue higher education, get a job, be the decision maker in their own family. And at times we even hire them in other spaces, like, for smaller projects or some things that gives them that autonomy, in their own lives. Yeah.
I have to say that it's somewhat surprising to hear how the girls are able to go on to higher education and whatnot. I guess we hear sort of the worst of things on the news here. How widespread, even beyond your own schools, are women and girls getting an education in Afghanistan these days?
That's a very good question. And that's one thing I think we should never sort of deny, that Afghan girls are getting education in many ways, in multiple forms. There are a lot of different initiatives that are happening all around the country. The fact that it's such a huge gap, because you also have to understand some politics and some economics behind the situation. So for the past 20 years, the Taliban had the first decree that they issued, by the way, in 2002 or something, was that if you're working with the public school, if you're a woman, or if you're working with a nonprofit that focuses on education, stop. If you don't stop, that we're gonna probably beat you up or something. If you don't, then we are allowed to shoot you. So the decree goes on and on and on. But what that shows is that that was their first sort of war on answering the US, but in a way that was all more about war on women. And since then, you have to understand, women's schools have been bombed, they have been burned, they have been attacked, the teachers have been intimidated, teachers have gone missing, teachers have been murdered, students' faces, their acids have been thrown on their faces. So a lot of things have happened. And then on top of all of that, schools were, especially girls' schools, were attacked all the time. So you have that gap open there, where in the past 20 years, you couldn't go to the whole country and build schools and have teachers and train them. So you had cities, small cities, where you could do a lot of education. But again, Afghanistan was a country that was riddled with corruption. So you didn't have a lot of sort of people who were committed to education. So even if the schools were made, they were not up to the standard. Not all teachers were paid. Not everyone who was teaching was qualified enough, and all of that. So you have a teacher gap, you have a school building gap, and now you have a ban. So it's a huge need where the villages are open up because there is supposedly peace. And now you have all these teachers who are also almost trained, but you also are getting all this money from the world for all of that. But what is happening is you don't have a public policy. You have a ban, so you cannot work around it. So yes, Learn is working. There are other organizations that are working, but the population is big. There is no public policy. There is no public mandate. So this is sort of like everyone doing their own thing, and there's no uniform policy. So you never know where the country is going, in what direction. And that sort of worries me a lot. Is, yes, sure, the 100 girls in each school are going to get the best. But what about the public policy? What about the goals? What about us as a country? How are we going to end up, So that's the sort of thing that you have to understand, that it's widespread because it's a public policy. But then there are also initiatives that are sort of trying to meet the need, but it cannot meet a public need, a millions of girls out of school need.
Do you work with other NGOs? Because Together Women Rise has funded several in Afghanistan over the years. And do you work with other NGOs?
We majority of the time work with smaller local communities and organizations within those communities if they come up with a proposal and ask us. But there are also times where other organizations reach out to us and we partner up with them. Yes.
Yeah. So when you do get that phone call from, one of the schools saying, the Taliban have been around and we're concerned, and you have to quickly relocate them, how do you quickly find new locations? And you're all the way over in the US.
So one thing I'm good I like organizing, planning, implementing, having backups. I think of the backup and the backup. So I have a backup for the backup. I like thinking things through. I like having risk and mitigation in place. Uncertainty does that to you. So if I'm getting a call in the middle of the night and somebody tells me that somebody has been around, somebody looking like a Taliban has been around, our teacher has not shown up, what should we do? If it's about the space, we already either have a backup space where we relocate, but we shut down for 2 weeks so that our steps are not traced. That's the first thing we do. The second thing that we do is if it's about the teachers, we do a head count. We also reach out to them. We have family numbers that we reach out to and talk to them about. And then sometimes we also remove them from those spaces for the time being and give them a send them to a safe house, and then reconvene. If it's about the students or some students' location, that has never happened to us, by the way, because we work with the parents very closely. But if that happens, we also have risk and mitigation in place. So given that so much has happened and you work in this space, at some point you really need to understand you need to have a person who's going to deal with the community members. You're going to need a person who's going to deal with the Taliban. If it comes to that, you need people who are going to smuggle people out of the country if you need. You need people who are going to send people to another province if there's a need. You need people who are going to smuggle books into the country, so you need to have those people. And I have that file, I have those people. So I divide and I call and I tell people and I do those connections. So yeah, it's a lot of different stuff that we do, but it works out. And yeah, again, I believe in organization a lot.
It sounds like you do, and you do it very well. So I'm going to wrap up with the last question, which is all about what can we do? You have a community here that cares very much about women and girls around the world, and as you can tell from the attendance tonight, women and girls in Afghanistan. What would you suggest to all of us that we could do to help the situation, to help these girls?
I think the best thing any woman around the world, especially women in the US, could do is reach out to organizations that you believe in. It may be learned, but it may not be learned. It can be another organizations whose vision or mission that you feel more true to your own vision. But reach out to organizations, ask them. Sometimes they need a volunteer for you to teach English. So we have women from California who are teaching English journalism to our girls, So reach out to them, ask them what do they need, share about their work, because sometimes you have networks that can help them. And trust me, I was talking to someone today and I was like, I am where I am today in my life is because of the women. Yes, my father played a big role, but the women around me, the women who got me out of Afghanistan, the woman who got me into the US, the woman who got me into Wellesley, the woman who put her time into my education, all those women. So being that you cannot be all of those people, I know we have busy lives, but if you reach out, if you lend a helping hand, if you share about people's work, if you reach out to their students, if you talk to them, if you have a resource. So we had someone who reached out to us and said, I have a mental health kit that can help your students, and we work with her now on the journaling, So you have those sort of things. It's great. If you know someone who's going to grant and fund another school, another position, another initiative, make that connection. I think those are the best things you could do right now. But at the same time, if you really want to go a step further, call your senators, call your congressmen, call them and ask them what happened to Afghanistan. Why is nobody taking any action? What is the mandate? Why is the US coddling Afghanistan's current Taliban and leaders? Sort of ask those questions. I think those are very important questions, and that's what women in solidarity right now can do with women in Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Wesley. I'll turn it back over to you, or am I turning it back to Deb?
Turn it back to whoever. Deb, are you good? Or you want me to go forward? Hey, tell you what, I can do this. This is just a reminder that Together Women Rise depends on your donations to fund projects around the world and to provide powerful learning opportunities and events like today's. So please visit our website at togetherwomenrise.org. Wendy put some information for you in the chat, and click on the link. Yeah, Wendy put some information for you in the chat. Together Women Rise has supported women and girls in Afghanistan over the years, including our grant earlier this year to Iangel, I think I pronounced it wrong, who I believe we have someone on the call, and other past grantees such as Rise's Way of Hope and Women for Afghan Women. Don't forget to join our second event. We're very excited about this new format. On the book, Last to Eat, Last to Learn, there will be a discussion format for those of you who would like to do a deeper dive and just talk amongst ourselves about the book and the way it impacted us. So this is going to take place on Thursday, September 19th at 8 p.m. And I think either Wendy or Vicky put a link in the chat for that registration as well. This next overall book club event will be on October 29th at 12 p.m., 9 a.m. Pacific time, 9 a.m. for me. And we're going to feature the book Radical Inclusion by Dr. David Monina Senge. Our guest speaker will be Jean-Paul Moronga, Program Officer with Equality Now, one of Rise's transformation partners. Jean-Paul has been directly involved in Equality Now's events to overturn bans on pregnant girls attending schools, which is the topic featured in the book. October is also full of events centered around the International Day of the Girl. We've designated October as Bring Your Daughter to Rise Month. We'll encourage you to bring your daughters and your granddaughters and your nieces and aunts or any girl or young woman to your October chapter meetings or to Rise events. And on October 10th at 12 p.m., we'll hold a special webinar entitled Girls as Agents of Change. Here are the stories of girls who are boldly taking action to shift discriminatory gender beliefs and practices around the world. October 11th is the actual day, International Day of the Girl. It's also the third annual Give to Women and Girls Day that highlights the fact that less than 2% of charitable giving in the U.S. goes to organizations that support women and girls. We need to change that. We will be launching our 2024 annual appeal with a special opportunity to double your donation thanks to several generous donors. Please watch for more details in your email soon. You can learn more about all of our events and our initiatives by visiting our website at togetherwomenrise.org.